Well, it's only 16 days left to cast your vote in this year's Virginia election. On the ballot, we have the office of governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, and every office for Virginia House of Delegates is on the ballot. What are the issues that are dominating Virginia? What's the impact of the debates that were held currently, and also the impact of the government shutdown? It's Stay the Water. I'm your host, Eric LaVille, and you're joining us for our 2025 Virginia Election Show series. Once again, we want to thank you for joining us, as you always do, as we broadcast from the campus of the Norfolk State University, home of the Spartan Nation, from none other than WNSB, Hot 91, the soul of VA. We also want to thank all of our supporters for supporting us as we bring this show to you every week to inform you as we bring movers, shakers, and policymakers to you to discuss issues important to, yes, your community, your Commonwealth, and your country. If you've been joining us every week, as you always do, you know that we've had various guests on the show, and we've also addressed a lot of issues. Last week, we addressed the voting rights issue as it relates to Virginia Beach and the 10-1 to 7-3-1 system, whether you want to continue voting for a representative voting system for your local city council and also school board members. But, also we've had individuals who are running for office, and we've talked also about issues affecting Virginia. So today we're going to continue with this series as we address issues affecting you in this very important race for governor. Now, it's just not governor, right? We have, of course, governor is the top of the ticket, but that statewide, all of us are voting for. And as I've mentioned, as Virginia goes, so does the rest of the country. So Virginia being the canary in the coal mine, or the cardinal in the coal mine, if you mind, how Virginia votes and the margin of victory for whichever side wins, I think is going to play a significant part in dictating politics and policy across the country. Usually the Virginia gubernatorial election, which is right after the presidential election, is a referendum in many times, or a nod of approval upon the policies coming out of Washington, especially the White House itself. This one hits a little differently because we've got a White House, a president that's wielding tremendous amount of power. I was speaking the other day on a show, and I mentioned the power that this president is wielding, and talking with a good friend of mine, an elected official, saying, hey, we got to take note of how this office is wielding power, because we know in politics, when you have power, you better use it, because you never know when you'll have it again. But how you use it makes a difference, not just in the moment, but for everybody and for our future generations. So whether you use your power for good of all, or the good for some, or for evil, or not good, I would say, it makes a difference, and it makes an indelible impact on us moving forward and how we plan to continue to build a stronger country, community, Commonwealth, and also how we may be weakened in the present, but more importantly, in the future itself. So when we look at the type of power that's being wielded, we have to go back in history. We have to look at what Franklin Delano Roosevelt did in the New Deal. But, that was something to get us out of the Great Depression and make it good for others, everybody in the country. Also, we take a look at what Nixon did during his time period and the influence that he had in his party itself. But now we see something a little different. Now we see the powers being wielded through policy, and also some say through the Department of Justice. As we just saw last week, the former National Security Advisor, John Bolton, indicted, and he pled not guilty in court for keeping classified documents. The raid in his home, and we've seen that. We've seen ICE across the country, and the No Kings rallies that we're having and the like. It's a lot going on, and not just a lot going on, but it's impacting a lot of Americans across the board. So when individuals say your vote doesn't matter, your vote does matter, because it dictates who's in office, which dictates the policies are being passed, which dictates the appointees and agencies, which dictates the policies within those agencies, which then dictates the services in which we offer to our people, the American people, to you in our country and also across our states. So this election is very important. So we ask that you exercise your right to vote. Make sure that you go out and have your voice heard. That's right. 16 days until the election. You currently have you have 14 days for early election where you can go out to the polls and vote. If you have not already voted, make sure you go out and vote. There's no excuse of why you shouldn't vote. Voting is your civic duty. It's also our responsibility to our generations that are coming behind us, because who we put in office, those policies, those laws, those statutes, those actions, those meetings that are made will impact our generations for years to come. So November 4th is the election day. It's our Super Tuesday, if you would, here in the Commonwealth, where we will elect a new governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, and yes, every member of the Virginia House of Delegates, all 100, and of course, local offices and referendums. Now, you have until October 24th to register to vote here in the Commonwealth. Now, you can register to vote the day of. You have to make sure that you confirm that through various provisions, but you can register the day of and vote. But don't wait till the day of. Register now. If you're 18 or going to be 18 by election day, register to vote. But you have until October 24th. That's next Friday. That's this Friday coming up, where you actually can register to vote. Now, in addition to that, early in-person voting started September 19th all the way through, that's right, November 1st. November 1st, that is on a Saturday. Think about that. You can go vote on a Saturday. You're running your errands. Go out and vote. Take a few minutes out of your day and make sure you make that happen. It's exciting. Take your kids, take your family, take your friends, make it an event. And also, you can apply for a ballot to be mailed to you through October 24th as well. Now, of course, there are some special provisions and special elections that are on the books, but this election is the general election that we currently have. Now, with that being the case, of course, we know Norfolk State University, we hosted our third statewide debate, and in the statewide debate, part of that, we hosted the only gubernatorial debate held in the Commonwealth. We received so many rave reviews and praise for the production, the professionalism by all of our staff here at the university, for those that were fortunate enough to be in person and those that viewed it. The production was on the level of a presidential debate. Absolutely outstanding. So hats off to the NSU team and also our media partner, both Wavy TV 10 and Nexstar, for making that happen. And also our community partner, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, who are our community partners for this particular debate this cycle. Truly, as a colleague said to me and wrote, he said, Norfolk State is the epicenter of political conversation. But with that, we've also had another debate, and that is the Attorney General's debate. So I'm going to take a look at and discuss, I believe, several things that are impacting voters here in the Commonwealth and also the country. But first, I want to take a look at the debate itself. Now, the debate itself, or the Attorney General's debate, the Attorney General debate was held at the University of Richmond School of Law. And in that particular debate, you had, of course, the current Attorney General, Jason Miyares, who's a Republican nominee, and his challenger, Democratic candidate Jay Jones. That debate itself was dominated. I watched it. I also did some debate analysis on it on 13 News Now, plus streaming with my good friend Eugene Daniels. And we talked about what really dominated that particular debate. And the dominating that debate was the text messages sent by candidate Jay Jones, in which he apologized for the violent and offensive text about a GOP rival during that particular debate. He called the messages abhorrent and also expressed his shame. Now, according to reports as well, the Jason Miyares, who is the incumbent, he is the Attorney General. He highlighted his record on crime and fentanyl control, and while Jones focused attacks on Donald Trump. tying Miyares to MAGA during the debate. When you take a look at that particular debate, of course, the style of it and of it itself was more like a courtroom. Of course, it was held at a law school, and it was narrated and hosted by the Virginia State Bar Association, which was our community partner in our very first statewide debate held in 2020 with the U.S. Senate incumbent, former governor and current U.S. Senator Mark Warner, and against his challenger. And with that, it had the feel of a classic two-man debate. It had the classic feel of a courtroom, opening and closing statements. And usually attorney general elections and debates are not, they're really not that watched heavily, and they usually don't get a lot of attention because of the top of the ticket, the governor, as we would say. That is the major draw to these elections in this cycle. However, this particular issue, this October surprise itself was one in which it became a lightning rod for against Jay Jones and also for the Republican Party nationally and locally, even where it, even just last week, of course, according to reports, where even it reached up to the top Democrats in Washington, where the House Minority Leader, Hakeem Jeffries, was asked whether he stands by Jay Jones, in which he stated, and again, this is according to Fox News, he stood by Virginia Attorney General candidate Jay Jones despite messages suggesting violence. Jones, of course, as we noted, apologized for his remarks, but he also faced mounting calls to drop out of the race amid the scandal. But despite that, Democratic leaders are still largely declined to call on Jones to withdraw from the race. Of course, early voting has started. Many votes have been cast, and more than likely, that's not going to happen. But right now, as, of course, the gubernatorial candidate stated, Spanberger and others, it's up to the voters, to cast their vote. And what in that particular debate, Jay Jones he apologized profusely, but then he shifted and basically looked at the mistakes of his challenger in the Republican Party, not calling the president and other members of their parties to task for their similar actions, whether it be the things that they've said or even the actions of those during J5, that not only those that helped to incite the insurrection of our government in order to overturn a duly authorized and legitimate election, but then also where individuals lost their lives, even members of law enforcement and people that were there. So, again, it was one of those issues that rose to the top, both in the gubernatorial debate and also in the attorney general. And it will continue. We'll continue to see it make its rounds in this particular election itself. But according to Jeffries, he said the attorney general has appropriately apologized for his remarks. And he said, quote, "I know his remarks have been condemned across the board by Democrats in the Commonwealth of Virginia and beyond," adding that, and then he said, "and that's the right thing to do." So with that, again, he has apologized, and individuals of his party are held him accountable, and then they are continuing to stand by his side while this election continues. So at this point, that race, according to polls, have narrowed. It's always been a tightish race, but it definitely has narrowed because many believe of that issue. So once again, one of two debates that were held here in the Commonwealth so far: debate for governor, the only one held here at Norfolk State University, and also the only for attorney general that was held at Richmond School of Law. When we talk about dialogue and we talk about conversation, there's no bigger conversation than what's happening now in the government shutdown. What is the impact of that on the Commonwealth? What's the impact of that here on our politics? But more importantly, what is the impact of that on our families? Well, and how is that going to affect us? So we're going to discuss how it is, but I just want to say that you're joining us here on Stay the Water. I'm your host, Eric Claville, and we're discussing the 2025 Virginia election series here on this show. We're discussing issues that are impacting Virginians and each election that we see. What are those major issues? What are voters saying, and what is the impact? what we see is the major issue affecting not just the Commonwealth, but the entire country. Here you have 16 days for early voting up until November 11th. That's right, November 11th on a Saturday. You can cast your vote for governor, for lieutenant governor, attorney general, and every single member in your jurisdiction, of course, of the House of Delegates is up for re-election, and you can cast your vote for that member in your district. And also for local referendums, especially here, we have the 10-1 voting rights decision for Virginia Beach and local candidates in every city. Well, in the cities of Newport News, in the cities of Norfolk, and also Portsmouth, the Commonwealth's attorney in other cities are on the ballot. And then, of course, you have in Newport News the treasurer position that is also on the ballot as well. And we discussed those, actually had candidates on during the primary for that particular race. But I think the biggest issue that we have right now is the government shutdown. On the 1st, government workers and employees received a deposit in their checking account. On the 15th, the middle of last week, they did not. As a matter of fact, the impact of the government shutdown is real. Individuals are having to make decisions on how they can pay their insurance. They're having to make decisions on a lot of issues, whether they can pay their mortgage, their rent, food, gas, and the like. As a matter of fact, there are some individuals who are being laid off. The president, once again, the White House, they are applying pressure to the Democrats to basically cast a vote to open the government back up by agreeing to the budget bill that was passed, which is the big, beautiful bill in which major cuts, $1.3 trillion to be exact, will go into effect, with over $1 trillion of that affecting health care, meaning that the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, healthcare subsidies will cease to be provided, which means that premiums will go up, which means that hospitals will close, and also which means that there are individuals that had health care that will no longer have access to it because it becomes unaffordable. We're discussing that on my next show at 12:30. The Clavier Report, Law, Policy, and Politics. Make sure you tune in. We're going to go more in depth about that particular aspect of why the shutdown exists and the impact of it. But I want to more so talk now about the impact of the shutdown on Virginia and the election coming up. According to Wavy, Virginia ranks, as we see, among states the most affected by the 2025 government shutdown. Matter of fact, according to a new study, according to Wavy, by Personnel Finance Wallet Hub, the study determined that Virginia is the 6th most affected state by the shutdown, with the U.S. government experiencing its 23rd funding lapse since 1976, its 11th actual shutdown. Wallet Hub released a report on the states most and least affected by the 2025 government shutdown. Now, Wallet Hub compared all 50 states and also District of Columbia across 5 key metrics, including the state's share of federal jobs, federal contract dollars per capita, and the percentage of families receiving food assistance. Now, how did Virginia rank? Overall, 6th, but when we take a look at the share of federal jobs, 5th. Federal contract dollars per capita, number 1. Real estate as percentage of GSP and access to national parks, 17. But I want to focus on those first two. When we look at share of federal jobs and federal contract dollars per capita, number 1, the federal contract dollars per capita, number 1, and the share of federal jobs, number 5. When we have this particular impact, it is, number 1. Federal contract dollars per capita. When the government shut down, that means people are not getting those dollars. Now, if you're not getting the dollars that you expected to get on the 15th and the 1st, then what happens? That means you don't have money to spend. So what happens to that local store, corner store you would go to get gas? You're either not getting gas or you're not getting that much gas. And then also what happens? What I do when I'm getting gas at my local filling station, I always go in and get a cup of coffee, always. So I spend that $2 and X amount of cents, close to $3 these days. I also may feel, hey, I can skip a day or two and treat myself, right? And get that little biscuit, that cookie I get, and maybe a bag of chips, right? So I'm spending $5+. But if I'm not getting a deposit, then guess what happens? That means that store is not getting that income. If that store is not getting the income, that means they have to cut down on the people coming in or they lose profit margin. Now, that's just me, right? But multiply that times the federal contractors that stop at the food trucks, that stop at the restaurants for lunch, those individuals that are buying gasoline, those individuals that are basically putting money in their homes and food on their kitchen tables for their children, for their families, that go to the store and may catch a sale, here or there. But they're not spending those dollars. So this becomes a major economic issue for our Commonwealth. When we talk about fifth for overall federal jobs, fifth of overall federal jobs, now we're looking at individuals that are being laid off, individuals who are saying because of this impasse that we have politically, we're going to increase even more so the pressure on the workers and say, even though you've been furloughed, we're going to lay you off and then we're going to fire you, right? So more firings, according to the White House, is taking place because, according to the White House, more Democrats will not or refuse to agree in order to open the government back up, given the parameters in which they have been provided. Now, with that, we also have individuals, like I said, who are furloughed that will come back. However, they're not getting paid. There was a story last week that talked about, it showed, I was reading it early one morning, Friday morning, as a matter of fact, where you had a air traffic controller that basically was passing out he was part of the union, saying, I'm an air traffic controller, and after leaving my shift, I'm going to go drive a ride share. Of course, we know it's Uber or Lyft, but a ride share company in order to put food on my kitchen table. These individuals have a stressful job, and he mentioned in that article, was mentioned that, he has a very stressful job. It's very stressful being an air traffic controller. There's a deficit of air traffic controllers in the country, and it's a job where he has to be 100% of the time, he has to be 100% right. And unfortunately, we have seen accidents take place, especially at DCA, DC Air Force. The Washington, D.C. airport, where we saw individuals, unfortunately, have an accident and individuals lost their lives between a military plane and a commercial flight. So this additional pressure, we have members of the military that having to come to work and still serve law enforcement, but they're not getting a paycheck. It's a lot of pressure. That's a lot of pressure. But let me take a look at how that pressure itself is passed on to members here in the Commonwealth. According to various news reports, the government shutdown has a significant and disproportionate impact on Virginia. I mentioned the Wallet Hub report as reported by Wavy.com. It ranks as the most affected state due to its high concentration of federal employees, our military personnel, and federal contract dollars. Now, what are those key impacts? I'm going to take a look at 4 here. Furloughs and unpaid work. I mentioned that from a federal state workforce. But here are the numbers. We have approximately 189,000 federal workers in Virginia. That's about 4.7% of the state workforce that have been furloughed or required to work without pay. Okay, almost 5% of the state workforce, our workforce, have been forced to work without pay, or they don't go to work at all. Now, the significance of federal workers as an impact. Now, 5% out of 100, all right, leaves 95% of other people working in other industries. But the services that are offered by the federal government are for everyone, right, for the most part. So their job, or them being laid off, or them being furloughed, or them being fired, or them having to come to work without pay, it adds an extra level of significance because those jobs are services that we rely upon as citizens in order to operate in our country. That's right. The Social Security Administration is something we all rely upon. You may not use it every day, but when you need it to be working, and because of this, it's not working. Let's talk about our military personnel. Now, all military continue to work but don't receive a pay during their shutdown. That's not a good thing. As former military myself, as a veteran, you're out there, and you're not getting a paycheck, but you still got to perform. You still got to defend. That's a lot. As a matter of fact, USAA released in 48 hours before the shutdown itself, they gave out $145 million in zero loans to their members, right, and federal employees. 0% loans, and they gave them 90 days to pay it back. Basically, individuals would receive X amount of loan up to their net pay. So basically, you get your paycheck through this loan process that you have to pay back once you get back pay. If you get it, because there was discussion in the White House that maybe you won't get it. But again, who wants to go through that? Federal contractors, I mentioned earlier, tens of thousands of federal contractors also affected, unlike federal employees. They're not guaranteed, here's the key, they're not guaranteed back pay once the government reopens. And how did Virginia rank according to Wallet Hub? Number 1 in federal contract dollars per capita. And then state employees, some state employees whose positions are funded by federal dollars are also furloughed because of this as well. Now, from an economic standpoint, impact on Virginia, according to one report, a 1-month shutdown could cut federal contract spending by around $3 billion in Virginia. So 1 month, 30 days. Right now, we are approaching, that 1 month period of time. And that is approximately $3 billion. Also, reduced spending, lost wages, unpaid federal workers, contracts. It basically is estimated $3.6 billion reduction in consumer spending in Virginia each month the shutdown continues. So that's $3.6 in consumer spending. That's $3 billion in spending in Virginia from federal contractors, federal contracts. Small business, loans are frozen, which delays millions of dollars to Virginia small businesses. And then the ripple effect, local businesses, restaurants, retail, child care centers, services, they all experience significant financial strain because of federal workers and contractors cutting back itself. Not to mention our SNAP benefits may continue for approximately 30 days, but federal funding for WIC programs stops immediately and also quickly runs out. These are the issues. This is the overall issue. According to the Watson Center, which is a part of Christopher Newport University, one of our great institutions, public institutions here, in a survey, noted that the number one issue that voters are worried about is economics. Democracy came in very close second to that. But economics. So the impact of this particular shutdown in Virginia is going to weigh on the election itself. So which party, which of your candidates that you're choosing, how do they feel about this shutdown? How are you feeling as a voter? How are you feeling as a Virginian? And how will you vote? And how do you believe this will sway your vote in one way or the other? Well, once again, we've got time, but time is running out. Make sure you go out and vote. Make sure your voice is heard. Make sure that you engage in one of the greatest experiments of government in our lifetime here in the world, and it is our democracy. Continue to join us as we come back next week and the week after for the next 2 weeks of our Virginia 2025 election show series. As we find out how Virginia goes, so does the rest of the country. Once again, thank you for joining us here on State of the Water as we bring movers, shakers, and policymakers to you to discuss issues important to you, the community, and the Commonwealth. Until next time, be good, be great. God bless. We'll see you next week.
Hi, I'm Carrie Washington, and you're listening to State of the Water with award-winning host Dr. Eric Claville.